Congressman Dan Goldman joins me today to discuss Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, and the rest of Donald Trump's misfit anti-democratic appointments, as well as Jack Smith and his upcoming report. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. Welcome to Democracy Docket, Congressman Dan Goldman.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you.
All right. So you and I talked a few months ago before the election, and I can't not start with the most obvious question, which is what do you make of what happened? Why did it happen? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, it's obviously the question that we're all asking and thinking about, analyzing the data. I certainly am very interested to see the official Pew results from the election to analyze it further. It was obviously didn't go near as well as planned or hoped for. But I do think that there are things that we can learn from some of the House races in New York, for example, where we were actually very successful. We flipped 3 seats. We held on to Tom Suozzi and Pat Ryan, and it was a successful House effort, even though the outcome in the statewide was far more favorable to Trump than we expected. And I think what it comes down to is that we have the right policies to help working Americans, but we just did not do a good enough job of connecting those working Americans to our policies and the messaging around it, and making sure that they understood that is what our focus is. And so I think that is my biggest takeaway. We need to make sure that we are putting front and center all of the policies, all of the work that we have done, that Joe Biden has done, to help working Americans and to explain why our policies will help them and why Republican policies hurt them. And there was a disconnect for, I think, a variety of reasons. Some of them may be very specific to this time and place. Some of them are probably a little more foundational. And I think as a party, we have to be focused on what it takes to win elections, less on, what the perfect message is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with this. I wrote something recently about building a new opposition. And one of the things that I said, I listed 5 things we need to do. The first thing is we need to win elections. And and sometimes, I feel like on the left, that goes underappreciated. There's a lot of this policy or this message, but fundamentally, if we want to prevent bad things from happening to the country and we want to empower people to have good things happening to the country, we need you, and your colleagues to have the gavel. We need you to be in a position, being able to really improve the lives of all Americans, not just those in your district and your state, but around the country. I want to jump, though, to the real reason I wanted to talk to you. Before you were a member of Congress, you were a federal prosecutor. And in that role, you were, studiously nonpartisan. And I say that because that is the role of federal prosecutors. And I know you're going to say you took that seriously, and the people you worked with took that seriously day in, day out. The big question I'm getting from people right now is a deep concern that between Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, who I know a little bit about Pam Bondi from some of the election denier stuff. But obviously Kash Patel's been very outspoken. He's nominated to head the FBI. She's been nominated for the Department of to be the next Attorney General. As a member of Congress, as a lawyer, as a former federal prosecutor, how should people watching this video, how should your constituents, how should people who are concerned about rule of law and equal application of justice, how should we think about
it? I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I think the concerns, the sort of worst case scenario concerns, are real. And what I've been thinking about a little bit as well is if you look at the foreign policy appointments that Donald Trump has made, they're pretty unobjectionable, right? I mean, Marco Rubio
Right.
is clearly qualified. I think Mike Waltz is,
Yeah.
he and I disagree on policy, but he's qualified. I think Elise Stefanik is, again, I disagree with her on very many things, but she, is qualified and competent. And then you look at the selections for our law enforcement positions, and it's a very different animal. I mean, first you have Matt Gaetz, now Pam Bondi, Kash Patel. These are all people who have threatened revenge and retribution against Democrats and political enemies. And it appears that their only qualification for the job is just that. And so when you compare the two, you see that Donald Trump is very capable of nominating qualified people for the positions in the critical positions in government, and that it therefore must be very intentional that he is selecting these people who are not qualified and whose only attribute seems to be both their loyalty to Donald Trump and their public statements expressing support for using the nonpartisan, apolitical Department of Justice and FBI for political purposes of Donald Trump. And I can't emphasize enough how dangerous that is, and how much that will underline not just the Justice Department, not just the rule of law, but the basic fabric of our democracy. And if we cannot trust the rule of law to be politically agnostic, we're a banana republic. Yeah. And we lose all faith in our institutions, and we lose all trust from people both inside the country and people outside the country. It will have a dramatic impact on our economy. It will have a dramatic impact on our diplomatic relationships. It will have a dramatic impact on our national security.
I'll be back with more of my conversation with Congressman Dan Goldman in a moment, but please make sure you take this chance to subscribe to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, or become a paying member today. There are a lot of lawyers in Congress, but there are not a lot of lawyers who are as accomplished as you were before you came to Congress. I mean, when I found out that Matt Gaetz was the Attorney General, literally the first thing I did was Google, is Matt Gaetz a lawyer? Like, I didn't even know he was a lawyer, but you were an honest to God, federal prosecutor in the most professional sense of the word, and so when people hear you say that, put on your former hat, not your current hat. What will it mean? As a practical matter. Were you in the Southern District of New York?
Yeah.
Which is for people who don't know, that's like the A team of the A team of the A team. They are the most the most fearsome. I'm not sure that's the right word, but the most professionalized, the most aggressive, really, U.S. Attorney's Office in the country, and they're known for being for their excellence, but also their just dogged commitment to rule of law and not partisan favor. So, what does it mean, in practical terms, if Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are in charge?
Right. So. Let's play it out. I mean, I think the parade of horribles is that they get confirmed. Donald Trump implements Schedule F, which would allow all of the apolitical, nonpartisan career professionals to be fired without cause,
including prosecutors.
What's that?
Including prosecutors.
Yeah. And then the protections for all career professionals are eliminated by Schedule F, which then would allow political hacks to be placed in those positions. So you have a political loyalist at the top who's interested in doing Donald Trump's political bidding and using and weaponizing our law enforcement system, our criminal justice system for that purpose. And then there are political hacks underneath who will execute those orders. We've seen on many occasions that there, including in Donald Trump's first term, that the career professionals stood up and objected to the politicization of the Department of Justice. The line prosecutors on the Roger Stone case resigned, withdrew from the case, some resigned. Same with Michael Flynn. The number two person at John Durham's special counsel office resigned, even though she had been his number two for many, many years. Those are the guardrails that exist with career professionals. And if they don't exist, then what happens is the investigations are not based on the evidence. They are based on the target, and they are based on an effort to use the threat of imprisonment as a political weapon. And it doesn't just mean it's unfair for those people who are targeted. What it means is there's no credibility for any investigation and any prosecution. And it will force basically the Department of Justice to fall under its own weight and
so
lose.
Kind of corrodes at both ends.
Absolutely. So even the most righteous and justified prosecutions will be questioned because others are clearly not based on the facts and the evidence and the law. And there are ways, the best example of this is false statements. So making false statements to Congress is a crime. Now, the law is pretty rigid in making sure that you have a very specific statement that you knew was false. But if you have anyone who testified before Congress and you decide that you want to go after them, you can open up an investigation as to whether or not they made false statements to Congress. And even if you ultimately don't charge it, you are you're out a lot of money from lawyers' fees. There's an incredibly invasive process. Your reputation is often damaged. And it's scary for anyone to be the subject or target of a criminal investigation. And so it's not that far-fetched to think that, someone like Anthony Fauci could be investigated for making false statements to Congress. And even if he ultimately were to prevail, it is a pretty damaging action and pretty damaging conduct, both to him personally, but also just to our political discourse. And it will have a tremendous chilling effect that will basically it will certainly influence government employees, elected officials, and others to change the way they do their job for fear of retribution and revenge. And if we have all of our government officials who are not doing their job in the right way for the right reasons and without interference of politics, then our entire democracy crumbles.
Yeah, it's funny. I had thought through a lot of that, but you really add a chilling detail to this, which is that, if you see the politicization of the Department of Justice to go after people like Anthony Fauci, like members of the January 6th committee, then when you're called to jury duty in some unrelated case and a federal prosecutor stands up and says, this is a bank fraud case, and this is the evidence, you're sitting there thinking, well, I know this department has been politicized because they went after Fauci. And so maybe now this is politicized. So your point that this could affect not just, as you say, the handful, as tragic as it will be and terrible and corrosive, at that end, it could actually, as you say, cause the entire confidence in the sort of criminal justice system to collapse.
Absolutely. And it's not just the DOJ. If you look at someone like Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe, John Ratcliffe was the director of national intelligence, and before the 2020 election, he declassified information purely for political purposes, for Donald Trump's benefit. And Tulsi Gabbard is woefully unqualified to be the director of national intelligence, to oversee all of our intelligence, when she has met with Bashar al-Assad and has expressed support for him, has expressed support for Vladimir Putin. We know Donald Trump has in the past provided highly classified information to the Russian foreign minister. And so, but it's not just that, okay, maybe they'll give the information to Russia. Think about what happens if you get rid of the career professionals in the intelligence community or in the Department of State or in the Department of Defense, and you have unqualified political lackeys there. We will lose a ton of sources that are really important to our national security. We will lose information sharing from our allies who will not give us critical intelligence because they fear the politicized use of it or the disclosure of it. We will no longer have diplomatic relationships with both our allies and our adversaries. And when Donald Trump orders Pete Hegseth to go disperse a protest on the mall with the military, all of a sudden you have the U.S. military rounding up Americans who are exercising their free speech rights. So you can see how in so many of these different areas, our basic values and institutions and the foundation of our country and our economy and our national security are really at risk.
So one of the things that I am most concerned about is Donald Trump's repeated promises that he will pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. You know, I think I am concerned at two levels. The first is that a country that does not recognize the damage that is done in moments like that is a country that will normalize and repeat it. And so we are watching a world in which the January 6th insurrectionists go from being the villains to being lionized and turned into martyrs and eventually the heroes. And that is a dangerous, dangerous thing that you know, there are parts of the country and places where that is still playing itself out over the Civil War, which was, you know, 150 plus years ago. And so I worry about that at one level. The other is just the practical impact of releasing essentially a militia, you know, loyal to Donald Trump, who will now go out and be organized you know, as a political force, as potentially a paramilitary force in some instances, loyal to him. Now, I know, because as I pointed out, you're a former prosecutor, I had a conversation, I don't think, well, I'm not going to use their name, but I had a conversation with a former U.S. attorney who said, Mark, you have to understand, federal prosecutors never like pardons. You know, like they rarely does anyone go to a federal prosecutor and say, yeah, we're thinking of doing a pardon. And they think, great idea. But I'm sure you would agree that there are instances where pardons, you know, where the commutation in the pardon power makes sense for presidents to exercise. In your hat now as a member of Congress, you recognize that. But talk about, from your standpoint, what is different about the proposed pardons of January 6th from what you saw as either saw as a member of Congress or before as the use of pardon power.
I think your analysis is accurate. And the real problem that I continue to go back to is the normalization of the batshit crazy stuff that Donald Trump wants to do. And it's part of the reason why I introduced that resolution reaffirming the 22nd Amendment, because we need to nip these unconstitutional and outrageous suggestions at the bud, because this is his MO, which he floats crazy things then everyone overreacts and he says, oh, I'm just joking. But then he's not joking. He keeps raising it. He keeps talking about it, and it just becomes part of the discourse. That is absolutely true with the January 6th defendants. And let's remember, I mean, these are people who injured and attacked 140 law enforcement officers. Several ultimately died. Many were seriously injured. And Donald Trump, who purports to support the police and law enforcement, is going to pardon people who assaulted law enforcement, who tried to invade the Capitol. And what it is it's, again, Donald Trump using the office of the presidency for his personal gain. If he pardons them, not only will they be lionized and supporters, but he absolves to some degree himself from that conduct, which is where his interest always lies. And so, yes, I think certainly the practical effect of having militia members now feeling like they have the support of Donald Trump and they're can do whatever they want is really dangerous. These are dangerous people, a lot of them, or some of them at least. But the fact that he would do something like that bastardizes the pardon power even beyond what he has done before, which was also to bastardize the pardon power. I mean, traditionally, pardons only went through the pardon attorney office at the Department of Justice. And Donald Trump has just completely eliminated that pathway and doesn't care and does it for his own personal interests. And so, again, it just undermines our system. It undermines our rule of law, our system of justice, because it then becomes a question of whether you are an associate of Donald Trump's or an adversary of Donald Trump's. And that's what he wants to set up, because he wants the threat in an authoritarian way to force people to choose to either be with him and get the benefits of our system and our government, or suffer the consequences if they're not with him, if they're an adversary. That has an incredible chilling effect, and it has it is really the first step towards authoritarianism. And so, again, with all of these actions, you can look at them in a very narrow way, in a vacuum. But when you really think about them, they have such a tremendous spillover impact on so much more than that specific action.
All right. While I've got you, I've got to ask you about Jack Smith. There has been a million takes on Jack Smith. There are he was appointed too late. He should have brought this case. He should have brought that case, whatever. Like there's like a million takes on the entirety of the investigation of Donald Trump and his role in the insurrection, his indictment in DC, the documents case in Florida. But we are where we are. And so people want to know, are we going to get a report? Was the big motion he filed, he filed that big motion in DC, it was like 200 pages or something that seemed to lay stuff out. Was that in lieu of a report, do you think? Do you think we get a report? Can Donald Trump block a report? Do you think a report is critical, or what is your take on all
that? I think reports for each investigation, each case, are absolutely essential. I actually think the special counsel regulations require it. Yeah. So if there is anything you can say about Jack Smith, it is that he follows Department of Justice rules and regulations, including by dismissing the cases because of the DOJ rule that you cannot prosecute a sitting president. So I fully expect and think that the regulations require reports on both of those. I fully expect him to provide those to the Attorney General before January 20th. And I fully expect the Attorney General to release those reports in full, subject to redaction for classified information or a separate classified addendum. And I think it will all happen before Donald Trump becomes president. And it should all happen before Donald Trump becomes president. And so, yes, I think we should expect an exhaustive report that lays out in great detail all of the evidence, not just that's been in the indictment, not just that's been in court filings, but that lays out, hopefully in coherent narrative form, the conduct that Donald Trump did, and that it will be for the American people, for Congress to assess, to evaluate, and to consider.
Do you think Congress will hold? Do you think the Republicans will be willing to hold hearings, or do you think they're going to want to ignore it?
I hope they hold hearings. I think they should. I think traditionally, every special counsel that releases a report in recent history has come before Congress to testify. Mueller did. Special counsel Hur has. That is, John Durham has. That's the normal course. And I think it'll be very telling if the Republicans do not bring Jack Smith, in part given all of their allegations about how politicized that his investigations were. If you think that those investigations were so politicized, how can you not call him to testify to ask him about your allegations of politicization?
Because Donald Trump will tell them, I don't want him to have a day on TV with questioning from both sides to explain his report.
This brings up a different point, Mark, that I think we need to focus on right now, which is that Republican members of Congress and senators don't get a pass for acquiescing to Donald Trump's lawless and unconstitutional behavior. And at some point, these Republicans are going to have to find a spine to stand up to him if we are going to continue to have a democracy. And yes, we will be fighting as hard as we can, but we are in the minority. The Republicans control. The Senate Republicans ultimately will control whether these unqualified, dangerous nominees are confirmed. The House Republicans have total control over every committee. I cannot say, Jack Smith, come testify before me. I don't have the authority to do that. So, yeah, we'll fight like hell and in every way possible, and we'll scream and yell. But ultimately, we can't give Republicans a pass. They take an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump. And that is where a lot of our focus has to be. It shouldn't be on preemptive pardons. It should be putting pressure on Republicans to say, look at what's happening, that we have to even be discussing preemptive pardons because the nominees of Donald Trump are such political hacks that they will abuse our system to go after political enemies. That is not okay. And you have an opportunity, Senate Republicans, to stop that.
It's such a smart point, and it is such an important thing that we overlook, honestly, because you're right. We treat them as if they have no agency. The fact is each of your Republican colleagues will on January 3rd stand up in the House chamber and raise their hand and swear an oath to uphold the Constitution. And that is an independent oath from what Donald Trump wants. And you're right. Like we do it's a really, like I said, smart point. We kind of let them off the hook and be like, well, is Donald Trump going to tell them to do this or is Donald Trump going to tell them to do that? But like at some point, they do have an obligation to actually follow their oath and their conscience and their role in the constitutional system. But do you see any signs of it? Like, forget a backbone. Do you see any signs of cartilage in their spinal columns?
I do, at least with the Senate Republicans, and they're doing their proper vetting. I think there's no talk of recess appointments anymore. They've asserted their own power to be the body that does the advice and consent and the confirmation for these nominees. And clearly, a couple have withdrawn for various reasons, Matt Gaetz included, but because they didn't have support, because the Senate Republicans stood up to them. And so, I sit here and I'm not asking the Senate Republicans reflexively to reject every one of Donald Trump's nominations, because some of them are objectively qualified. And I certainly understand a president having the prerogative to put people who he wants. That's the cost of elections and losing elections. But they have an obligation to make sure that these people are vetted and that they are qualified and competent, and that they will execute their duties competently and in a constitutional way. And so I am a little more optimistic than most, and I'm hopeful. I'm a little more concerned this week than I was last week, but I do think that for those who care about democracy, putting pressure on the Senate Republicans to uphold our Constitution through the vetting, advice, and consent process is a very important thing for all of us to do right now.
Okay, last question. Same question I asked you last time. You walk down the street, you get recognized, your constituents come up to you, and I am sure some number of them are very worried. They are worried about what the future will be. Donald Trump has not even taken office yet. And so what do you tell them? What do you say to, folks who come up to you and say, Congressman, I voted for you. I voted for Kamala Harris. I am heartbroken about the outcome of the election. What hope, what actions, what do you tell them?
Well, first of all, I think from a legislative perspective, the Republicans are going to have a lot more difficulty than they think. The margins are very slim in both the House and the Senate. They will be able to pass some laws in the Senate along party lines, but most will still be subject to the filibuster. And in the House, it's such a slim margin, slimmer than this past Congress, when they couldn't get their act together, and basically everything that passed required Democratic support as well. So from a legislative standpoint, we have to keep speaking out. We have to keep making the case. We have to keep putting pressure. But the executive branch is really where, I think the larger concerns lie. And what I urge people to do, and I certainly understand the desire to recede into the background, to put your head under the pillow and hope that this goes away in 4 years, that's not going to make it go away. And what I would say is that everybody needs to lean in a little bit more. And lawyers can volunteer to help file lawsuits against, all sorts of things that are coming down the pipe. Birthright citizenship, Schedule F. I mean, all of this Project 2025 stuff. And I know a lot of the attorneys general are preparing that. And I think that, lay lawyers, whoever you are, can certainly help.
Absolutely.
And then I think it's important for voices to be heard. It matters. It really matters. And I think that we have to be strategic about it. We cannot chase every crazy thing Donald Trump says, as we did the first time around. And I say this all the time, you want to try to eradicate birthright citizenship with an executive order, go ahead, eat your heart out. It will go to the courts, and even the Supreme Court can't read the 14th Amendment any different way than it clearly is. And so let them spin their wheels on that. We should not waste our energy on that, but we should be focused on the things that really matter. And that way we gain more credibility and we can be more effective. But everybody's voice really does matter. We'll certainly be here fighting as much as we can, amplifying the concerns that we have. But democracy is really rooted in the people, and the more people are engaged and active, and whether that's letters or emails or calls or protests or what have you, that stuff matters. I'll tell you, I pay attention to the calls I get. I pay attention to the emails I get, and every elected official does too. Republicans.
You think your Republican colleagues do?
Yes.
Well, you are a hero of democracy. You are one of my personal heroes. Thank you for joining me today.
Great to be with you as always, Marc. Thanks for your work.
Thanks. Thanks for watching Defending Democracy. Make sure you're subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters to get the latest voting rights and democracy news. We'll see you next time. Defending Democracy is a production of Democracy Docket, LLC.